You are in Baltimore, October 1849. The clothes on your body are not the clothes you left in. You are found outside a polling place, barely coherent, drifting in and out, trying to gather yourself into a sentence and failing. 4 days later, you are dead. No clean explanation survives. Alcohol, illness, violence, election fraud, some combination. Maybe none of the tidy stories people like best. And so the legend hardens instantly. Of course, Edgar Allan Poe dies like this. Of course, the man who wrote Ravens, Tombs, Guilt, and Madness ends in confusion, borrowed clothes, and public collapse. But that version is too easy. Poe was not simply in love with darkness. He was trying to master something worse than darkness. He was trying to master helplessness. Before Poe became a symbol, he was a child marked early by disappearance. His father was gone when he was very young. His mother, the actress Eliza Poe, died before he turned 3. Those are not just biographical facts. They are the original fracture in the story. He was taken in by John and Frances Allen of Richmond. They gave him shelter, education, access to a world of money and polish. But there was a distinction that never stopped mattering. Edgar was raised by the Allens, not formally adopted by them. That means he grows up close to security, but never fully inside it. Close to status, but not protected by it. Loved by Frances Allen, by many accounts, but dependent on John Allen, whose support could turn cold, conditional, and punitive. For some people, instability becomes a chapter. For Poe, it became the weather. And once you see that, his work starts to change. The obsession is not just death. It is the terror of being left powerless before it. As a young man, Poe learned how humiliating it is to stand near privilege without being able to keep it. At the University of Virginia, he arrived with talent and ambition, but not enough money. Debts piled up. Some came from gambling, some from basic shortfall, all of it sharpening the same lesson. He was expected to perform like a gentleman without being financed like one. John Allen refused to absorb the damage. The relationship, already strained, worsened. Poe would keep replaying that pattern for years. He needed institutions, patrons, editors, benefactors, then collided with them. He entered the army. Later, he entered West Point and effectively forced his own dismissal. This is one of the core contradictions of his life. He craved structure, but could not endure the structures that held power over him. That matters because it explains something people flatten into madness. His life was chaotic. His art was not. He did not pour disorder onto the page. He built against it. Poe became a working writer in the brutal economy of American magazines. Underpaid, overexposed, and permanently vulnerable. He edited, he reviewed, he fought, he made enemies. He developed a reputation for cutting criticism sharp enough to leave scars. But what made him exceptional was not just temperament. It was design. Poe believed a poem or story should create a single, concentrated effect. Not a vague atmosphere, not a loose mood. An effect. Deliberate, controlled, almost engineered. That is why his best work feels claustrophobic. It does not wander, it tightens. In Poe, the room closes. The floorboards answer back. The house becomes a nervous system. The mind becomes a trap. People call him the poet of madness. But madness blurs. Poe sharpened. Whatever instability existed in his life, the writing itself is terrifyingly exact. And maybe that is the real psychological secret. A man who could not control loss in life became obsessed with controlling sensation in art. Then, for a moment, Poe found something like refuge. He married Virginia Clem, and the little household he shared with Virginia and her mother, Maria Clem, seems to have given him what his life had long denied him: intimacy, routine, and belonging. Not wealth, not safety, but belonging. That is easy to underestimate. For Poe, it was enormous. And then the old pattern returned in its cruelest form. In the early 1840s, Virginia began showing signs of serious illness, most likely tuberculosis. There were hemorrhages. There were recoveries that were not recoveries. There were stretches of hope, then relapse, then the long psychological damage of waiting inside a sick room. This is where biographical summary stops being enough. Because the point is not simply that his wife was ill. The point is that Poe was forced once again into the role he seemed born to hate most: witness to a loss he could not stop. He had known sudden absence as a child. Now he had to live through slow disappearance as an adult. Once you understand that, the work stops looking like Gothic decoration and starts looking like emotional architecture. In poem after poem, story after story, Poe returns to idealized women taken by illness, beauty threatened by decay, love interrupted by the body's collapse. The Raven is not just a spooky bird in a dark room. It is a ritual of grief. A man tries to reason with loss, then gets trapped inside it. Annabel Lee turns love into elegy and refuses to let the dead stay buried in feeling. Ligeia and other tales stage a fantasy even more extreme. Memory itself tries to overpower death. And it is not only the women. Look at The Fall of the House of Usher. A family line decays, a house decays, the interior life decays. The building and the mind become inseparable, as if terror can seep into wood, blood, and air. Look at The Telltale Heart, or The Black Cat. These are not stories about evil in the abstract. They are stories about guilt becoming acoustic, something you hear, cannot shut off, cannot out-talk. Look at The Premature Burial. The nightmare is not simply death. It is consciousness trapped inside helplessness. That is the pattern. Again and again, Poe writes about being enclosed, overpowered, unable to command the body, the room, the nerves, the ending. He did not invent those feelings on the page. He refined them there. Then came one of the bitterest reversals of his life. In 1845, The Raven made Poe famous. Not stable, not wealthy, famous. That distinction is brutal. He became recognizable enough to be discussed, imitated, caricatured, yet he was still trapped in the same financial precarity, the same dependence on magazines, the same vulnerability to his own destructive impulses and to public humiliation. His drinking did real damage at points in his life. That much is clear, but the image of Poe as a man who lived in a permanent alcoholic fog is too simple, and later enemies did a great deal to encourage it. Poe was often unstable. He was not only unstable, he was ambitious, disciplined, analytical, proud, thin-skinned, often difficult, sometimes self-sabotaging, and still capable of producing work of extraordinary control under pressure. Then Virginia died in 1847, and after that, the center weakened. He kept trying to reconstruct a future through lectures, new projects, renewed courtships, fresh plans. But after years of strain, grief, and insecurity, the force holding everything together was failing. In 1849, after a period in Richmond that seemed, for once, almost hopeful, Poe set out traveling north. He did not arrive where he was expected. Instead, he reappeared in Baltimore in distress, disoriented, ill, wearing clothes that were apparently not his own, and in a condition that still resists clean explanation. Historians still argue over what happened. Alcohol is one theory. Medical crisis is another. Violence has been proposed. So has cooping, a form of election fraud in which victims were allegedly forced to vote multiple times. The records are incomplete. The testimony is messy. Certainty is not available. But a second injustice followed the first. After Poe died, Rufus Wilmot Griswold, a literary rival, helped shape a damaging public image of him as a depraved, deranged creature of vice and ruin. That portrait was influential. It traveled, it sold, and it fit the Gothic brand too neatly to die. So the man who spent his life trying to impose form on chaos lost control of his own story in death. That may be the darkest symmetry of all. People still approach Poe as if he were born from shadow, as if he emerged fully formed, already draped in ravens and graves. But the darkness in his work was not decoration. It was compression. It was pressure. It was lived helplessness, reworked into pattern. He lost his mother early. He grew up not fully claimed. He stood beside wealth and security without being protected by either. He found a home, then watched illness turn that home into a waiting room. He became famous without becoming safe. And when he died, even the truth about him became unstable. That is why Poe still feels modern. He understood that fear is not only monsters and graves. Fear is dependence. Fear is uncertainty. Fear is loving what you cannot keep. Fear is the mind trying to stay elegant while the world removes one certainty after another. So, when you read Edgar Allan Poe now, read past the costume. You are not just reading a man who wrote horror. You are reading a man who turned helplessness into form and made that form beautiful enough to survive him.